Well, Dean Bachman, thank you so much. What I love about that is the power of George Washington is on his knees. And if we're reminded of that each and every day, that that's where our power comes from, it is a great reminder. I've about called you Michelle, but Dean Bachman, one quick story as we get into a few remarks in terms of your series. It's a critical series, because I can tell you all across the globe, people are wanting to know, is this experiment that we get to call home actually going to survive? And you see all of the back and forth that's going on right now with Doge and Democrats and Republicans and unaffiliated, and what is going to happen with our great country and government. And yet I am here to say that God ordained us for such a time as this to make sure that we proclaim his name and that we fulfill that calling that we're on. But Dean, you wouldn't even know this. Here I was, a business guy, being elected to Congress. It was never on my bucket list, never wanted to be a member of Congress, felt a calling. In fact, when I felt that calling, literally I called my wife. I said, well, I think the Lord's asked me to run for Congress. And I'm a fairly shy individual, and so when it happened, I literally got physically ill, had to pull over on the side of the road. I know where I was and throw up. And I mean, I didn't want this. And yet you have some people who want it all the time. But yet with Debbie and I, we prayed, we knew that indeed that this was the calling. And such is the foundation of our great country. When you look back, one of the founding fathers that I love to quote was, or tell about, was on the Delaware State Quarter. There is a horse and rider, and many people who look at the Delaware State Quarter, they think that horse and rider is Paul Revere, but it actually is not. It's a founding father by the name of Caesar Rodney, and Caesar Rodney literally was the guy that was the tie-breaking vote for the state or area of Delaware. The story is told he goes through a driving rainstorm, 26 hours on horseback from Delaware to Philadelphia, arriving just in time to cast the deciding vote to make sure that we declared our independence. And that ultimately what we now know as this constitutional republic had its birthplace right there. And Caesar Rodney actually cast the deciding vote for Delaware. Now, the rest of the story is that he had a green scarf that would cover over part of his face, and it covered a skin cancer that literally could only have been operated on back in England. And so by signing his name, he was essentially signing his death warrant for the love of what we get to call home. And it was that kind of total sacrifice, that Caesar Rodney sacrifice, that we all get to enjoy. And they're patriots all over. Our founding father stories are great. So God bless you for telling the stories and bringing those to life in terms of what matters. Now, the interesting fact is Caesar Rodney's statue has been taken down in Delaware. Now, it was on the state quarter. It's somebody they serve, and when you look at Delaware, if you ask anybody, they knew who Caesar Rodney was. It would seem like it was a strange name for us, for one of our founding fathers, but yet here was Caesar Rodney being a founding father. They've got a great statue there that they took down, and not wanting to honor him because of the fact that he had owned slaves at one particular point in his life. So judging him by today's standards for something that was done so long ago. But I share that because it is important for us to remember that if we continue to let our government become so weaponized and woke, we are losing the very moral foundation of who we are as a nation, that Judeo-Christian values that we embraced so long ago that actually have been a part of who we are. It's been the calling for men and women who serve, and yet I've had the unique opportunity to serve President Trump as his I guess I was the 30th chief of staff. And so as I went in to serve him, I never realized how difficult it was going to be. The president is the hardest working man in Washington, D.C. by exponentially. He never sleeps, and so what does that mean for the chief of staff? They never sleep. I was sharing earlier, you get a call at 3:18 in the morning, and he gives you a to-do list. Now, he's more sensitive than that, but he, at 3:18 in the morning is giving me something that he thinks needs to be addressed, and then he's checking back with me at 7:30 in the morning to see how I'm coming with the project. I said, well, sir, there's no one that's gotten up between 3:18 and 7:30. So I share that a little bit because I want to give you a perspective. Right now, there's this tension, and you're going to get to hear from people on the judiciary, and you're going to get to hear from people in the legislative branch. And yet, I had the benefit of being able to be close to President Trump and see how things either get done or don't get done. And here's the concern I have. The president right now is operating at warp speed. I mean, I thought I had a tough job. His current chief of staff has to have the toughest job because he is going at so many, at a pace that is just, it is superhuman. But he also has a love for this country right now where he's seeing that the time remaining is not that great. And what we have to do is stand up for what is right and good for our country. And as with Donald Trump, as he starts to work with these kinds of things, here's the kind of things that he might be up against. So I would get to the office around 7:30 in the morning. The president had maybe slept 3 or 4 hours. And so I knew if I got to the office, he didn't know that I was at the office, so I could get most of my work done before he actually came down to the Oval. But as he would come down the Oval between 9:30 and 10 o'clock, he had actually been making phone calls from the residents the entire time. And one phone call from the president or the chief of staff, I must confess, I didn't know that one phone call from the chief of staff can actually get things done. And you're making life and death. Sometimes, I had the unfortunate time of being the chief during COVID, and we were making life and death decisions. And truly with supply chain issues, with China trying to make sure that they were cutting off our supply chain for critical goods that we have. And yet the president was so tenacious in making sure that he got things done. He would not yield to the enemy from within. And I say the enemy from within. Many in the bureaucracy do not want to see this president or this administration succeed. Now, I share that because you have a representative, you have state senators, you need to make sure they hear the clarion call from you. And even if you think your voice doesn't work, it's important that you hear that what we have is we need that fine balance. We need a strong executive branch. Some people say the executive branch is far too strong, but yet the strongest is really the bureaucracy that continues to go on each and every day. Because for every decision that may have been made in the Oval Office, there was a group of people filing lawsuits, going to the judiciary, making sure that it didn't get implemented. And what they wanted to do is make sure that they just wait him out, just wait the president out. I can remember as a member of Congress going in before I served as his chief of staff, and we went in and said, and the president said, fine, we're going to do X, Y, and Z. And as I'm walking out, there were people in his West Wing saying, we're not going to do that, undermining the President of the United States. And yet, here's the other thing that we must realize. When the president looks at right-sizing government, it's a limited government that should be for the benefit of all of us. This President Trump has been more pro-life and pro-Israel than really any president we have ever had. Yeah. And that's against odds, quite frankly, within the administration who said, well, you don't want to be that strong. You don't want to say that, sir. But yet he is one who's willing to call out those who many times have been a mole. They've actually gone under. They're in the bureaucracy. They're there and saying, we're going to wait out the president. So what do we need to do as constituents, as people who love our country and love the freedoms? What we need to do is make sure that we don't silence ourselves. If I wasn't here today, there would be somebody else filling this podium talking to you about something, and yet what happens is oftentimes we take ourselves out of the game. Chancellor, thank you for being willing to sacrifice and speak truth. Each and every morning, this morning I was watching as you were doing some of the news this morning, and I was saying, where is the clarity among all the legacy media folks that we heard just in the first 15 minutes of you bringing that clarity? God bless you. Thank you for speaking truth. But a lot of people have asked me, well, what was it like to work with the president? Well, I've already told you he didn't sleep much, and he would do that. The greatest invention known to man, according to him, is TiVo. Now, the reason why the greatest invention known to man is TiVo, because he can watch all the shows at night, and so he'll work. He would come down to the office 9:30, 10. He would work literally all day. At about 8:30, maybe 9 o'clock, he would go up to the residence, but he didn't go to sleep. He was following up, making phone calls. How do I know? Because I would get calls on my way home from the office after I left. He would call and say, Mark, so I would have a little notepad as I was going home, writing additional things for him that he wanted us following up on. Then after that, he would actually do TiVo, watch all the different shows, and he would literally say, well, why are we paying for that? Why are we doing something? Some of you may remember that we had some funding for the Wuhan labs in China. I can tell you that I was watching in real time as there was a reporter that was reporting on the fact that the federal government was still spending money on the Wuhan labs. Now, we were in the middle of COVID, and we're still spending money for that. And I said, how in the world are we doing that? One, government's gotten too big. Two, it's way too expensive. We spend billions, with a B, of dollars on things that honestly you nor I would ever approve of individually, and Congress has not approved. They appropriate this vast amount of money, and yet here it is we were doing. So I'm going, okay, I've got a problem. We're funding the Wuhan lab, and I know that the president is not going to be happy with this. So I get on the phone with the secretary, and I said, Alex, I said, we need to cut the funding, and we went back and forth several times. I said, no, cut the funding. And so he said, okay, it'll be cut off tomorrow. And so as we are looking at this, the president, watching the greatest invention known to man, TiVo, runs across this same interview and says, what in the world are we doing funding this? Now, because the government has gotten so big, it's important that you have a number of people. And one of the wonderful characteristics of this president is that he takes all kinds of input from all kinds of people. And so what would normally, now it makes his chief of staff get gray hair. My hair was jet black before I went to work for him. But from a control standpoint, he wants that. He wants to hear from all of you. In fact, he would more readily ask you your opinion on what's happening so he could get your perspective and your take. And that's a uniqueness that I think we don't appreciate in the executive branch. When we get the input, it is a representative form of government, but when we think of that, we think about the legislative branch, but this president says, I want to hear your input. And I say that in the most admirable and confirming way, because he will go at great lengths to do this. So here he was, he sees it, he says, I can't believe we're funding this. He calls his secretary, he says, Alex, we need to cut the funding. And the secretary goes, Yeah. The chief's already called me. He's already told me to cut it off. It's being cut off in the morning. He goes, what do you mean the chief's already called you? And I said, well, the chief has called me about 2 hours ago. Well, I was watching it live. He was watching it with TiVo. And so he calls me up. He says, Mark, I just got finished talking to Alex, over there. And he says, you've told him to cut off the funding for the Wuhan lab. I said, yes, sir, I did. He says, well, Mark, I didn't tell you to do that. I said, no, sir, but you would have. And he starts laughing. He goes, no, it's the right thing to do. You're absolutely right. We need to do it. But I share that because little things get done in the executive branch with a phone call or with a stroke of a pen. But that's for good or bad. You see the executive orders that have come in from those that want to make sure that our military men and women are not just fighting military men and women, that they're indoctrinated on all kinds of other issues that, quite frankly, we wouldn't have accepted even a decade ago. And yet, by the stroke of a pen, they made that institutionalized. And yet, this president is making sure that that gets rooted out. And why is he going at warp speed? Because quite frankly, the time remaining is not much. You think 4 years when you're in office is a long time? I can tell you it's a blink of an eye. He's tasked, you've probably read about, he's tasked DOJ to get rid of the anti-Christian bias that has been inherent in so many different areas. And yet, does he mean it? Not only does he mean it, he wants full reporting, full accountability, and if you're not successful, he wants to know why you're not successful, and he will find someone who is successful. And so I can't say enough good about the speed and about the way that this president is actually working. Now let me maybe open it up a little bit broader. One of the things that our founding fathers were so incredibly smart about was the fact that they took the judiciary, the legislative and executive branch, and separated it all out. They were worried about the power of a too powerful executive branch. Why? Because of the history that they had. And yet what we need to see is the history, the 250 years of history that we've had, is our inability to rein in a government that continues to grow and grow and grow has to be stopped. It will be painful to stop it, and you've seen when some of that gets stopped, what happens. There are people rising up in Washington, D.C. saying it's the worst thing that's ever happened. The hardest thing to do is get fired from a federal job. It is truly the hardest thing to do. You can't get fired from a federal job. And yet, you and I, at risk in the private sector, can get fired for almost any cause at any particular time. And we think of the government as the same way. And so what we need to do is make sure that we promote people in the federal government based on merit. And if they're not performing, we ask them to use their talents somewhere else. And that's what this president is all about. 7:30, I get up. President Daily Briefing is there. You've got this, we're getting constant. The chancellor knows we get constant attacks on a regular basis or threats of attacks. So every morning you're getting a briefing of what our enemies want to do to us. And so as you have that briefing, you get that, you go over that with the president. As the day goes on, the president is having constant meetings on a number of different aspects, but bringing in cabinet members, holding them accountable. It can be something as minor as the price of oil and having to actually get involved in that, or something as major as do we deploy our men and women and put them in harm's way to save someone. The president has been so unbelievably concerned about our men and women going in the military. Listen, while he's been president, we've had really no wars when you really think about it. But it comes from decisive actions and making sure that he treats the enemies as enemies, and he's not a man known for appeasement. Some of you laugh a little bit, because you see that in him. But what happens is the strength is respected. And so here's my ask of you, and I know Dean Bachman and I are going to open it up to questions where it normally gets a little bit more lively there. But here is my ask of each one of you. We say that we don't listen to the media and take it in, and yet each one of us does. We watch the headlines, we read the headlines, and we try to determine whether it's truth or not truth. And here's what I would encourage each one of you to do. If you have an opinion, don't silence yourself. Let that opinion be known. Speak up. Because if it's not the Judeo-Christian values and the Christians that are here speaking up, someone else will fill that gap. But the other is don't believe all the negative headlines that you read about this president. He loves this country. He is sacrificing for this country. And quite frankly, when the cameras are not on, he is not only the most generous and kind individual, but he's always looking out for someone else's welfare. And that would serve as a good message for us. So we must be willing to sacrifice our lives like Caesar Rodney. We must be willing to answer the call like President Trump and others have done. But we must, most of all, start it on our knees as George Washington did, to know that indeed that we're being led by our Heavenly Father to do what is right and good and righteous for our country.
Well, I think to follow up to what you just said, there seems to be a freedom that President Trump enjoys now, even more so. He always has struck me as being a very free man who's self-possessing, but he seems very free in this term, that he's going to do what's right no matter what. Whatever he thinks is right, he's going to do. That's what I see as a boldness and an honesty and a freedom within him, that he's going to act. He's not going to hold back. And he certainly seemed like that at the UN, but it almost seems post-Butler, when he nearly lost his life, and he recognizes, he says it over and over, it was the hand of God. Do you see that in him, that he recognizes the hand of God saving him?
Yeah, I think I think the president recognized that he has been saved for such a time as this, and his boldness, though. I mean, to your point, his boldness. He is not afraid to have some bad headlines. Most presidents don't want a bad headline. They don't want any kind of bad headline. Well, the best way I can put it is if you've got somebody that's wearing a tie-dyed shirt and you throw another color at it, you don't know whether the color was thrown at it or it was part of the original design. And so the president has had so much thrown at him that shouldn't have been thrown at him, that he doesn't mind the bad headlines. He's going to do what's right for America, and that boldness, I think all Americans should applaud that, and I certainly do.
Well, that's why it's so important that you're here as our first recipient today, but also as our first spokesman on the executive, because no one knows the inside other than Susie Wiles today. And she's probably just catching her breath, I imagine, from event to event. But no one has experienced that in the way that you have, that marathon lifestyle that you have with the president. But you see even a difference from when you were there versus today.
Oh, listen, I couldn't imagine anybody working harder than President Trump did when I had the privilege of serving him as chief. But he's outdoing himself. I mean, he's literally, if you want to put it, he is actually on steroids right now. If we believed in steroids, we'd say that's a good thing. We don't believe in steroids for all the media that's listening in. I'm not saying that. But he's actually just really outdoing himself. And what it means is that there will be key decisions made almost every single day he's in the Oval. So your prayers for the president and for this administration need to continue to go up, because those things are coming at such a rapid pace, not just the executive orders and things that he's done, but real decisions that are making. So if, he's done more about trying to right size the fact that men should not play in women's sports, and God bless him. I mean, who would have thought that would have been a debate we would have had, 10, 20 years ago, but God bless him for doing that.
Yes, absolutely. So you're telling us he's not an auto pen presidency. Is that what we're hearing?
Well, I can tell you, not only is he not an auto pen president, so he has a big black Sharpie. You may have seen that. I mean, even his presidential Sharpies actually have his name, Donald Trump, on there, but they're presidential Sharpies. And we got them by cases. I mean, of course, everybody wants a presidential Sharpie. I will tell you, the gold emboss does wear off a little bit after you use it. So I just want to, highlight that for you. But no, not only does he sign everything and review everything, the other interesting thing is that he will make edits to his own speeches. So, every president has a speechwriter. And so he will actually have, we had 3 speechwriters when I was chief that would come in, prepare some of it. He would start. Well, he has it in a little kind of slick area. I may give you more detail than you want to know, but it was actually there. And he writes on the outside of it, and he would change the wording. Well, that doesn't emphasize this enough. I want to do this. And he would make his own edits. And the speeches oftentimes not only had his fingerprint, but had his handprint, his palm print all over it. And so he's very engaged. He keeps you on your toes as a chief. And
was one of his speechwriters in his first term Stephen Miller?
Yes, yeah. Stephen was a speechwriter that worked with me, and Stephen went on to do American First Legal when we were asked to use our talents elsewhere in 2021. But now is back as his deputy chief, and Stephen, along with Vince Haley and a few others, were but what was important to the president, and I think it's for everybody that's tuned in, what was important for the president was that you got why he thought America was so exceptional, that you got why America, literally in his voice, he wanted it in his voice. The other toughest job was the teleprompter guy trying to keep up with the president. When he wanted to emphasize a point, he would emphasize that, and the teleprompter's trying to figure out where that was written in the prepared speech.
One time backstage, little known fact, the president was speaking at Family Research Council at their Value Voters Summit, and Stephen Miller was in the back behind stage, and he was operating the teleprompter, trying to keep up with it on the speech. And it's because the president artfully puts his own words in. He's not following the speech necessarally. He's editing it as he's reading it.
Well, and he will look at the audience and he'll say, well, okay, what's important? What's the thing that I should be emphasizing? And as he starts to emphasize it, he'll say, you know what? I didn't emphasize that enough. And he'll come back. And so that's when the teleprompter guys goes crazy. So.
It's pretty amazing. Little known fact, I gave Stephen Miller his first job in D.C.
Well, God bless you.
Yes.
And so I didn't tell the rest of the story about Dean Bachman. So when I just got elected, she had just run for president. I mean, and she was like the conservative star. I mean, if there was a Wonder Woman in politics, it was Michelle Bachmann at that point. So I'm down as this newbie and she comes in to a place where a lot of the members go, and she sits at a far table, and I that's Michelle Bachmann. So I was actually the groupie, trying, there's Michelle Bachmann over there. I said, one day I want to meet her. Well, the Lord has a great sense of humor. Not only did I get to meet you, but you have been a strong voice for life, for Israel, and for what is right and good. And you've talked about us and others being persecuted. You've been persecuted. And I just want to say thank you for leading the charge and not yielding to the left God bless you for your strength and your perseverance.
It's a good club to be in. It's a good club to be in. That's what we're trying to teach our students here at Regent. And we have a question from Leanna from our online audience. And she asks, is the president aware of the problem of Islamic rising in America? And is there a plan to address it or thwart it?
Yeah, so again, I want to stress, me speaking for the president, I don't work for him anymore, so anybody that's picking this up, but I can tell you generally, him being aware of radical Islamic behavior is not something that would be new to him. It's something that obviously during the first administration he recognized as an issue, and so addressing that and making sure that he addresses it certainly is a priority for this administration. And yet what you see is he's visiting and creating all kinds of, I mean, we did the Abraham Accords while I was chief of staff, setting up trade relationships between Israel and some of the other Middle East countries that they said could never happen, by the way. I mean, it was never going to happen, and yet this president was willing to take the bad headline if it didn't happen. And what did we see? Not only was there a historic an accord that was made, but it's been the foundation for having a relationship with our Middle East countries and the Middle East countries having relationships with Israel. And I think we'll see that. But is he blind to it? The answer is no.
Well, I think part of that too, we've had other questions come from members of the audience before on the issue of Qatar. Because the Abraham Accords have been brilliant with the UAE and the various countries that are in them. There's been concerns about Qatar, the gift of the plane, for instance, to the United States, knowing that Qatar is the chief funder of terrorism in the world, and the relationships that are happening with them. I know that there's the good side and the bad side of various, and you've been all over the world with the president. Do you want to comment either for yourself? You're not commenting for the president.
Yeah,
do you have any thoughts about
so
Qatar?
I think here's one of the interesting things that we will do is we will read into a whole lot more than what needs to be read into certain meetings or certain interactions between Middle East countries and this administration. Knowing that indeed the president wants to have a good relationship with every single country as long as you acknowledge the fact that we're who we are, and he believes, and I believe, that America needs to be first. It doesn't need to be America last. And as long as you respect that, he's okay with that. But indeed, what we do is sometimes we will take a visit. I had a number of people calling me. They were concerned about the president not visiting with Bibi and Israel when he went to the Middle East trip. And yet what you see is a stronger relationship with Israel and the president on a number of different fronts. But yet, if you were to read just into that one moment in time, and so for many, I would say, let's don't read into the one moment in time. And this president plays three-dimensional chess, and when the rest of us are not even doing that.
Well, I've never seen any president roll out the red carpet the way he did for Bibi Netanyahu the first time he came in during the second term. Let's ask our live audience if you have questions. Yes, sir.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Meadows, for coming out and speaking to us today. Thank you, Dean Buckman, for putting this together. Thank you both for our faithful service to our Lord and our nation. My question is this. We've seen excellent boldness in this second term from President Trump, and especially in his selection of cabinet secretaries in the administration for the Christian faith. We haven't seen that in decades in our country, if ever, really. With the passing of Charlie Kirk and the memorial last week, we've seen the president, vice president, the rest of the cabinet at the memorial speaking boldly and openly about the Christian faith and its importance. We've seen Secretary Hegseth at the Pentagon opening up for prayer. We've seen OPM release memos to federal employees encouraging them to evangelize to their fellow coworkers, which was previously prohibited. What do you think this means for future administrations? Do you think that this momentum for boldness in the faith will continue going forward in our country, or what can we do to keep that ball rolling?
For the benefit of the online audience, the question is regarding boldness of faith in the Trump administration. Do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, so thank you for your question. I love the fact that you're wearing a Marines t-shirt. So my brother-in-law was in the Marines and graduated from Paris Island, which we went down for. It was 100 and some odd degrees. You know, you could feel the heat. It was so hot. So I think the jury is still out in terms of whether what this president and this cabinet is doing, whether it will make a difference in future administrations. I think if it's followed by a Republican administration, there will already be the precedent. So what I would say with all of you, people will do what they've seen you be comfortable doing. The very fact that George Washington, his statue is with him on his knee praying, would actually encourage other people to bow their knee and pray. And yet what we've done is we haven't had a president and a cabinet willing to be bold for their faith and what they stand for, like this cabinet. Even his cabinet in the first Trump administration, not so much. And so that's actually been able to provide a real life example for others to follow. So I think others will follow that. But I'm also not Pollyanna enough to think that, okay, that's going to solve everything, because it's the boldness of those leaders, Secretary Hegseth and President Trump and others who are willing to speak out about their faith. And by the way, both of them persecuted unrelentingly, is still to this day, and yet they're willing to do that. So for us, what is important is for that example is to make sure that we're doing it, not here just on this college campus. Listen, it's much easier to talk about your faith in the Lord Jesus Christ on this campus than it would be on the University of Virginia campus. You know, because many of you, if you were students at the University of Virginia, would probably pick and choose and all of that. But what this president has shown us is being bold enough to do it in the Oval, being bold enough to do it at cabinet meetings, and being bold enough to do it in government. We should be bold enough to do that. If you're ever on a flight, you want to test this out. Sit next to somebody and see how the conversation is going, and then just say you're a lay minister. And watch how their language changes very, very quickly. But as long as we're bold for his calling, I think it will be contagious. And hopefully this is not a moment in time, but a movement that we'll see.
Great question. We appreciate it. We have an online question for you, and it's one of the online members of the audience said that they had the pleasure of photographing you at multiple events and heard many of your stories. So would you share the Oval Office red button story?
Well, I've told that story a number of times, so I will tell an abbreviated red button story. And if you've heard it, my apologies to you for repeating it. But I was still a member of Congress. The president was in, not only Steve Bannon and Reince Priebus were kind of his two senior advisors at the time. And for me, it was important that we actually moved the embassy to Jerusalem, because every president had come and gone, and they had done a waiver. And if you recall, President Trump actually did a waiver the very first time. And so I went in to talk to Reince Priebus and Steve Bannon, and I said, listen, we've got to make sure that and I was not as gentle as I probably should have been. I was very emphatic. We need to do this, and so I get in the car. Debbie's with me. We're headed back to the apartment, and I get a call from Reince, and he says, "Mark, can you come back and tell the president what you just told us?" I said, "Well, Reince, you're his chief." My first thought was, "You're his chief of staff. Why don't you tell him?" But I said, sure, I can come back. And so I came back, and I come in, and the president's actually not in the Oval Office. He's in the dining room where he did a lot of his work. So I come through the Oval Office, and he sees me, "Mark, my favorite congressman, come on," and that was not necessarily the case at that particular time. We ended up being very, very close friends, but I come in and I'm talking to him like we would be talking, and I was telling him about the importance of moving, literally moving the embassy to Jerusalem. And it wasn't just Jews, and it wasn't just that I represented one district that there was not a synagogue in my entire district. It was all evangelical Christians, and yet if you said you stood for the nation of Israel and you were pro, you would get a standing O. And so, but I kept talking to him, and there was on his button, on his desk, there was this like rectangle with a red button. So I'd talk to him a little bit, and I'd look down at the red button. I'd talk to him a little bit and look down at the red. So he could tell I was getting distracted. So finally he goes, well, Mark, it makes you nervous, doesn't it? And no. Well, he hits the red button. My eyes get as big as saucer. I'm looking for incoming coming from anywhere. And so sure enough, out of this closet comes this Navy assistant, and he puts a Diet Coke right in front of the president. I said, well, sir, that is pretty neat. He says, you want to see it again? Boom. There was a Diet Coke for me. And I share that because he's got a great sense of humor, but I also share it for this. The president at that particular point said there will not be another waiver, and I promise you that the embassy will be in Jerusalem. And we know historically that the embassy is now in Jerusalem because of this president's boldness and his willingness to stick to that. So that's the red button story.
That's a beautiful story. Thank you. Another question from the audience. Yes, Mike.
My question has to do with draining the swamp. Using the red button, but
They think it's a hot tub, by the way. They don't know it's a swamp. But go ahead.
specifically the U.S. Department of Education
Right.
that he's talked to, and I kind of wonder, is there an understanding within the staff of how deep the takeover of the U.S. Department of Education has been? The 10 education labs, we're still continuing to fund the Center for Civic Education, whose curriculum basically teaches that the Bill of Rights has been document, and we have to now go for the Universal Declaration of Human Rights.
Right.
Those kind of things are permeated in the national standards, and I believe it's the result of what we're fighting today. 25 years ago, when Michelle was not known by anybody, I gave her endorsing speech to run for the Senate in the Minnesota State House. And back then, we were fighting education.
Right.
And we were fighting what was going on and what's coming. And everything we see today, we could have predicted is coming because of what's in education.
Yeah, so do I believe that they see how deep seated the problem is? I do. And I wouldn't have said that maybe in our first term, but I do think that they see how deep-seated the problem is now. The real question becomes is how do you drain the swamp, and how do you make sure that it doesn't continue to infect the generations 25 years from now? And that's a bigger problem because all universities, almost without exception, get money from the federal government, whether it's in loan assistance or other federal grants. And those strings that get attached have deep, deep tentacles. And so in doing that, even when you go to change something, the headlines are not only negative, but the headlines are, okay, well, poor little Johnny or poor little Sally, or they're going to lose this particular benefit because they're cutting this out from the Department of Education, which honestly is not the case. It's not true. And in fact, I would trust your Board of Regents here and your chancellor and your admin a lot more with the federal dollars in deploying it. Listen, they could be sloppy with it and they would spend it more effectively than what Washington, D.C. spends it. But yes, I do see it. I do think that in the next 3.5 years, you're going to see tremendous strides being made there in terms of trying to pare that back. But thanks for, here's what I would offer. If you'll send me some of those examples, we can make sure that people are aware of it. Okay, all right.
Just a real quick follow-up, though. Like you say, the headline is going to be, he's against education. So is there enough is there a Doge-like team looking deep into it? Because it's not that hard to find within the department if you know where to look.
Yeah, well, the problem is you've got to be myopic and looking just at one particular point. Russ Vogt and Dan Bishop over at the Office of Management and Budget are extremely good at doing that kind of thing and going in. But if you can imagine a bureaucracy that has millions and millions of people and millions of programs, over 670 agencies and sub-agencies that have climate change programs. 670. Now you would think it's only the Department of Energy or the Department, EPA, but it is in every single, we're so close to Norfolk and our brave Navy men and women that serve there. Let me just tell you, the things they do for climate change that are mandated, even today, it's sad. And it's whether it's them or the subcontractors or the contractors. So we need to help them be myopic. And if you'll give us some feedback for that, I'll try to make sure I get it to the right person.
You just brought up a great example of the 600 plus different departments that there are dealing with climate change. So how does a president who, if you listen to his speech at the UN, he was lecturing all the nations of the world, you got to get out of this green climate scam because your countries are being lost. So if we have this, we have to get our own house in order. How can he do that? Does he have the power, in your opinion, to do it? Or does he need Congress to give him legislation? Or can he just shut these various departments down?
So I'm of the belief that constitutionally he has the right to actually limit the amount of money. Congress appropriates, as you know, but in truth, Congress never appropriates because they never appropriated. When you were a member of Congress, they never appropriated.
Continuing resolution.
And they just they just continue the funding and they up the money, but they don't actually have a priority. But I do think that what they can do is, at worst case, they could move 670 plus different climate change groups into one group. That way you can be myopic, you can look. But if any member of Congress, if you were to ask them how many different climate change groups we have in the federal government, if they could get within 50 of the accurate number, I would buy you a steak dinner. I can just tell you, there's no one that would, unless they're tuned in today. But it's just part of it. And Michelle and I, both having served in Congress, we know that. But I think getting to the bottom of it is certainly possible.
We have another question from the online audience from RC, who says the president recently suggested he was trying to earn his way to heaven. With so many Christians around him, why does he still seem to misunderstand the gospel?
Well, RC, I don't know that he misunderstands the gospel. Sometimes what you will do is you will see things that the president may or may not say, and I don't want to speak for him. Here's the interesting thing is we all are called to be evangelists. We're not called to be judges of our evangelistic efforts. And sometimes we act as judges more than we do evangelists. And so, and not to say that RC is doing that, but I can tell you that if you watch the tribute to Charlie Kirk and didn't get a clear message of the gospel of Jesus Christ, there's no way that you could watch that and not get that. And so, just like with many of us in our faith journey, it takes different times where we're closer. I know that Debbie and I are closer to the Lord today than we have been in many, many years, and yet I wouldn't read too much into a statement. I just say that the gospel of Jesus Christ, His word will not return void, and we know that from Scripture.
The president absolutely has heard the gospel and knows the gospel, and we saw that on display, as you said, at the Charlie Kirk Memorial, especially when you have the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, actually give the entire gospel message in his story. And then the same thing with the Vice President and Pete Hicks as Secretary of War. It was like nothing I think we've ever seen before. The entire administration, there are 2 plane loads of the administration there.
Well, and I want to emphasize, for all of you that are here or watching online, that doesn't happen without a president who says it's okay to happen. Let me just tell you, you don't go off script and stay around long. and so, that is a president that is embracing that ability. And, he acknowledges God's sovereignty more since Butler,
Yes.
then I think, but I don't want to share anything from private conversation, but I'm just saying let's continue to love this president, support this president, pray for this president.
And he understands the brevity of life.
We
that
all,
Scripture talks about.
I think Charlie Kirk's death made us all understand the brevity, of life, and yet we think we have tomorrow, and all we have is this breath right now.
That's right. Let's talk about something future, AI. It's present, but it's future. Can you talk a little bit about AI? This president seems to have embraced it in an incredible way. He's been encouraging much investment in AI. He wants the United States to be the leader of AI, telling them they can create their own energy generation plants to fuel AI. What do you see with the president and concerns about AI, but also the possibilities of AI?
Yeah, I think we all have the same concerns about AI, that computers end up being the ones making the decisions all the time, and yet can it be a useful tool? I can tell you at the Conservative Partnership Institute, we're actually having classes developed right now to create what I call prompt engineers. Because AI is only as good as what you prompt it with, and you can prompt it and you can get garbage out. So we need two different groups of people, and it's going to be a totally different group in terms of higher learning. Is going to be prompt engineers, how to make the best prompts, and the others are going to be the fact checkers on how you fact check the fact that, I know I put in with the AI search the other day and said, okay, who's Chief of Staff of the President of the United States? And it came back with President Trump's Chief of Staff is Ron Klain. Well, Ron Klain was Chief of Staff for Joe Biden. So, you don't want to necessarily, but when we look at big data, I think that that's the real key. And it's going to be a real difficult thing for universities to grapple with, because, do you embrace it? Because basically say, don't mess with AI because, it's going to write your term papers for you. I can tell you, it writes a great letter of recommendation. I can tell you that. I used to procrastinate. Do you make it too sweet? Do you make it too hard? And yet I can it's learned my voice now. And boy, I can say I've known this person for 10 years, give unqualified, and boom, boom, in second. In fact, I have to hold my letters back because I can do them so quickly now. They go, did you really write this? And so so does it have concerns? Yes. But it is here. The Chinese obviously are using it in a big way. My big concern is with cyber, and y'all have a great program in cybersecurity, is when you start to infect the data that goes into the AI to produce a different result. I think that this is as big as the internet is, but it can be as wrong as the internet is too. If you think the internet in some of the worst ways that we possibly can, AI can be the same way. So I think for us, it's going to be some ethical challenges, but the president knows, he sees the competitive advantage of being able to bring big data together to make decisions. And so we've got to figure out how to manage it. And am I concerned? Yes.
On a final note, the obvious question would be, what makes Donald Trump tick? But the other question would be, do you see in an individual, once they assume the office of the presidency, understanding that it really isn't about them, that it is the office, it's historic, do you see a difference between the individual and what makes him tick and the individual who becomes president and the weight of the presidency? Is that a clear question?
Yeah, I think so. The weight of the presidency to Donald Trump is not lost on him. The legacy that you leave, the things that you get done, and those are the legacies that he sees, not as Donald Trump, the mogul, or not as Donald Trump, the business guy. It's really as the presidency. And I think that his actions that get criticized in many different areas will actually redefine the presidency as we know it. It will make for a more active executive branch, since that's what we're talking about, a more active executive branch. But it also will make for a more transparent executive branch. I think for him, it's all about saying, these are the ridiculous things that we're spending money on. We need to push back. And so that's not lost on him. And so it's interwoven with him as an individual, but he sees the presidency and the importance of it as something to be revered. And to that, I'm grateful. I'm also grateful that he's a president who sees when a Christian pastor is being persecuted in South Korea, that he's not afraid to tell the leader of the South Korean government, I don't know that it's true, but if it is true, it's a problem. I mean, who would have thought that I can tell you, there are no other presidents, Republican or Democrat, who have been willing to do that. And so we need to applaud him when he does those things, because there's certainly enough people that will be giving him a thumbs down.
We had Pastor Andrew Brunson, who was sitting in your chair, telling us what President Trump did to go to bat for him.
Well, I mean, here he was stuck in Turkey,
Yes.
and the president not only, he used political capital to get Pastor Andrew Brunson out, and I was fortunate enough, I was in the Oval when Andrew was from my home district, came in, and yet it was a president who's saying, we're not going to leave an American citizen behind, and we're not going to take and be bullied by a country that's a NATO ally. It's just and so God bless him for doing that. I've seen him make decisions in the middle of the night to risk reputation and men and women to go rescue missionary sons or daughters out of harm's way. When it's about protecting someone that's an American citizen, the answer is always yes from this president, and I applaud him for it.
Amen. Yes, please. Would you be willing to close us out by praying for this generation to take the baton and just pray for them, because now it's on their shoulders to keep this great American experiment
Sure,
going.
I'll be
Thank
glad
you.
to. Dear Heavenly Father, we come before you, and I thank you for the young men and women that I've been encouraged by, not only here in this room, but on this campus. And Lord, you know that the baton has been passed from my generation to this next generation, and it is up to them to trust in you, to be led by you, to preserve this great experiment that we've had the privilege of calling home for over 250 years. Lord, I pray that you would just give them a boldness, as we've talked about boldness, give them a boldness for their testimony in Jesus Christ. And I pray, Lord, that same boldness for me and for the university and for its leaders, its trustees, its chancellor, its deans. Lord, you just continue to speak mightily through the voice of those that have been called. Lord, I pray that you would just put a special anointing on this younger generation to be bold for you, to know that our nation is one that sends a message to the rest of the world that this Christian nation is willing to stand by their God and their Savior. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Congressman Mark Meadows,
Great
Chief
to
of
be with you.
Staff
Thank
to
you.
President Donald Trump. Thank you, online audience. Thank you, everyone here in Virginia Beach. Thanks, and join us again for our next 4 symposium.